Chapter 6. Petya. Some 50 miles inland from the furthest tip of northern Russia, where the land spits out into the Arctic Ocean, there is a ruin that was once Czervenaya Station, an operational control post for some of the Soviet Union's most terrifying weapons of mass destruction. The ground around the area is for the most part flat, and usually strewn with ice and snow for most of the year. About half an hour before Bond was summoned to the operations room at the headquarters of the Secret Intelligence Service in London, a sled, drawn by 4 dogs, bounced and rolled its way towards the little parcel of ruined buildings. The man who stood at the back of the sled was a Inuit Eskimo, and he came from the small settlement close to what had once been a whole village, some 2 miles from Czervenaya Station. After the people had come to build the now ruined station, many of the Inuit had died from diseases brought by the strangers. Only the hardy ones remained. Now 4 families were left in the settlement. They merely wanted to live as their people had always lived. So they made themselves useful to the strangers, just as he was doing by traveling to the nearest township and collecting artifacts which he could sell when the troglodytes came up from under the ground, which they did every 6 months or so. The Inuit was very tired, anxious to see his family again, for the entire trip had taken the best part of a week. Though he would never know it, the accident occurred because of his fatigue and the pace at which he ran the dogs. He did not even see the boulder peeping from the slick ground. The lead dog saw the danger a fraction too late, swerved to avoid the obstacle, and swung the sled into an impossible turn. The runners hit the boulder off-center, and the driver was thrown hard against a cluster of rocks and ice. Even with the layers of fur and the big hood he wore, the man broke several bones, including his neck. He tried to move, but could not even stir for the pain. He lay there in the snow, with the dogs whining and clustering around him. He made a supreme effort, one last great push through the agony, attempting to get up. This last action killed him, and he dropped back onto the ground, a little bundle of fur. The dogs gathered around him for a while, as though trying to give their master some warmth to revive him. After 10 minutes or so, they sat down and waited. Eventually, the lead dog would guide them back to the tiny settlement, but for the moment they kept a vigil over their dead master. Nobody could know how this accident and the unsupervised dog team would save another life in the next few hours. It was quite soon after the sled accident that the Tigra helicopter arrived, bearing its 2 uninvited guests. Both British and American analysts had shown an interest in the seemingly defunct Czervenaya Station. From the big satellites, they had many pictures of the area, which the Russians claimed had been taken off the operational list for the past 2 years. The pictures showed ruin and decay, except for one thing: the huge radio telescope dish that appeared to grow from the ground. The dish had been there for some years, but the picture seemed to show that it occasionally changed. The analysts maintained that over a very short period of time, the dish had become larger, and it moved now and then. There were skeptics, of course, some of them with a great deal of experience and knowledge. The latter pointed out that the dish might well move with the wind, and the idea that it had become larger was an optical illusion caused by changes in the weather and different angles of the sun. In fact, the dish was larger, and it did move at the command of men and women hidden deep in the earth, some 30 feet below the surface, for the Severnaya station was far from dormant. The dish, at this very moment, was locked onto a forgotten piece of former Soviet space junk. In reality, a fully operational satellite over the Middle East. It was being controlled by a young woman sitting at a workstation in a well-lit, windowless, scrupulously clean, spacious computer room. There were roughly a dozen such men and women, all working in this section of the complex. Not one of them was over 40 years of age, and they had been chosen from a list of hundreds of potential computer scientists throughout the Federation of Russian States. Doors to kitchens, restrooms, dining and sleeping facilities led off from this technical area, and a thick glass wall divided the scientists from a control room, manned by several men and women in uniform. This second section contained a long console, replete with digital electronic instruments and switches topped by a vast screen, blank at this moment. Sunk into the wall behind this complex control area was a brilliant red safe. Next to the safe, in scarlet lettering, was a notice in Russian which said, "Locked. Authorization code required." And, as an extra precaution, a steel electronic gate secured by steel plates directly in front of the safe. Out among the lines of computers, the girl manipulating the satellite was tall, slender, and dark, with high cheekbones and clear brown eyes. What marked this girl, Natalia Simonova, from the other technicians was her neatness and the clothes she wore. A long black skirt and white shirt, covered by a patterned waistcoat. Many of her colleagues wore the untidy, shapeless grunge look, or worse. The man to her right was clad in dirty jeans, a Wired magazine t-shirt, and a black leather motorbike jacket. His hair looked as though it had seen neither shampoo nor comb in a week, and his attitude was one of an edgy, spaced-out cyberpunk. Boris Grishenko was indeed all of these things, and tolerated by those who controlled the establishment because he was, undoubtedly, the most brilliant scientist in the entire complex. Natalia spoke quietly into the small mic attached to a headset. "Rotate right 60 degrees. Ascend to 100 kilometers." The blinking satellite symbol on her monitor moved at her bidding. She smiled as though she had just taught a clever trick to a pet. Her delight was interrupted by a maniacal scream of laughter from Boris. "I've done it! Done it!" Natalia glanced at her friend, Anna, who was seated at the terminal on her left. Anna rolled her eyes and made a gesture with her hand which meant to show that he was unhinged. "Natalia, come and see what I have done." He had gone into hyper-crazy mode, so she walked over and looked at his setup. Boris, being Boris, had several screens set up in front of him. "Ha ha! I'm in!" He laughed, a tuneless cackle. On one screen, she saw the seal of the U.S. Department of Justice. "Christ, Boris, you've hacked into the U.S. Department of Justice. Do you know what will happen if they trace it? If they trace it to here?" "Sure. The chief of computers will call me a genius, move me back to Moscow, and give me $1 million. Which is never going to happen." "They pay us in good hard currency anyway. And to hear you talk, sometimes that's what you get. $1 million. Ah, we all get the same. I'd like a chance to spend it sometimes, instead of being here, living like a groundhog." "A worm, more likely," Yeah, anyway, the Americans are too stupid to catch me. They can't detect viruses on a hard drive, let alone... His computer gave a warning beep, and the seal dissolved, leaving a message flashing on the screen. Unauthorized entry detected. You were saying? Natalia laughed. Boris cursed and quickly typed in a command to load a program of his own. The program flashed a reminder on the screen. To send Spike, press Enter. He hit the Enter key, and the prompt changed to Spike sent. Good. Spiked them. Natalia shook her head. Boris, just hang up. No way. He turned and looked her straight in the eyes. I spiked them, you stupid goose. That program of mine seizes the phone line of anyone trying to trace me. It jams their modem. They can't hang up. He typed another command, which brought up another message. Initiate search. Enter password. Now what? From Natalia. I enter the password. He typed 10 keys. On the screen, the letters were not visible, coming up as a line of black circles. Bullets, he explained. I know what bullets are, Boris. As he tapped enter again, so a map of the world came up on the screen, and a red line began to trace the telephone line, the names of places ribboning out as it passed through major junctions or satellites. From Severnaya, it tracked straight to St. Petersburg, across Europe to angle off over the Atlantic to the United States, where it crawled quickly to Atlanta and stopped, leaving a winking red light over the city. His screen went blank for a second and was suddenly replaced by the words, FBI Headquarters, Computer Fraud Division. Boris said something obscene and impossible, then banged sharply on his enter key to clear the screen. I need a cigarette, he snapped moodily and sounding sullen. Well, I need a coffee. Natalia glanced at her screen to make sure all was in order and walked towards one of the doors that led to a kitchen. Boris Ivanovich Grishenko swaggered away from his terminal as if he were walking off the job, heading for one of the utility doors. He went up the steep angle of the stone steps that led to the outside world, grinned at a security camera, pushed open the door, and stepped into the cold, bleak landscape. As he did so, a voice echoed from a concealed speaker. Comrade Grishenko, you are using an emergency exit. You have been told before this is illegal. Get back to the technical area as quickly as possible. Come up and stop me. Boris was obviously always doing this kind of thing and had little tolerance for authority, knowing he was probably the most essential computer technician they had. He pulled out a packet of Marlboro cigarettes. He had bought a huge amount on his last leave, paying with the hard currency the technicians earned. Putting a cigarette between his lips, he flicked at the wheel of his lighter. The flame spluttered for a second and was blown out, as if by some sudden, strong wind. Grishenko raised his eyes. The dark shape of a helicopter was descending onto the landing pad some 50 yards away, its rotors stirring the powdered snow into a white tornado. The Tigra has landed, Xenia Onatop thought grimly. She popped the sleek canopy and undid her safety harness, reaching down to sling an Israeli-made Uzi onto her right shoulder. She already had spare magazines in pouches on her belt. "Ready, General?" She spoke into her headset, hearing the General's snarl of response. "Let's get on with it. I've been ready for some time now." They were both in uniform, Xenia with the insignia of a colonel, her partner with that of a general. Bond would have recognized the general immediately. For the last time he had seen him, General Urumov had a gun to the head of his old friend, Alec Trevelyan. Boris Grishenko did a swift disappearing act as soon as he spotted the two officers. Now, Urumov kept step with Xenia as they marched purposefully along the side of the ruined building, where ice and snow had been cleared from a path which led to the main door, down wide concrete steps, along a corridor to a security door. A guard sprang to attention and saluted, though General Urumov seemed to hardly notice the man. He knew exactly what he was doing, looking straight into a camera placed almost at eye level and clearly speaking his name. "General Arkady Grigorovich Urumov, Head of Space Division." There were a series of fast bleeps as the system went through its voice recognition routine. Then the steel security door opened, and the pair were through into the most sensitive area, where the duty officer snapped to attention, his second-in-command hastily rising and buttoning his jacket. "General, if I'd known you were coming," Xenia muttered. "You'd have baked a cake, yes." "You'd have been ready for me, I think, Major. This is an unscheduled test of the Sedranaya facility, a war simulation. We shall be test firing GoldenEye. The report status." He looked up and could see that the computer scientists and technicians behind the thick tinted glass were moving, craning from their workstations to see what was going on. "Jump, man! The report status!" Urumov barked at the major. "Status normal, sir. 2 operational satellites, Petya and Misha, both in 90-minute Earth orbit at 100 kilometers." "Good. Here's the authorization code. Hand me the GoldenEye, today's access numbers, and the key. Please. I am timing you as from now." He had already thrown a plastic card down on the small counter. Now he ostentatiously brought his left arm up and studied his watch. The major almost fell over himself trying to get things done correctly, punching in the numbers to unlock the metal gate in front of the safe, using the palm print pad to ID himself, then tapping in the safe's code of the day. The lock beeped different tones, like a digital telephone, then clicked open. Xenia gestured to the other officer and said that he should open the safety door through to the technical area. "On a wartime basis, Captain, this entire facility must be open in case there is need to evacuate with little warning." The captain did not argue. "Today's codes, sir. The electronic firing key and GoldenEye." The duty officer brought the items from the safe. The key, a plastic card, and a small golden disc in the center of which was an engraved eye. "Good. Now, make the blind see." The major looked down at the disc and removed a piece of golden tape from the center of the eye, revealing a circle where the pupil would have been. "You know how the GoldenEye works?" Yes, General. When positioned correctly, the disk allows a laser beam to launch through its center, thus imitating the firing mechanism of the satellite. Good. You have done well, Major. I think that will be all we require. He turned to Xenia. Colonel, you take over. Xenia almost lazily unslung her Uzi and put 2 quick bursts in the direction of the 2 officers. Then she walked unhurriedly to the door leading to the technician's area and sprayed everything in sight, changing magazines with an almost robot-like perfection. Bodies were thrown back against equipment or spun violently. Showers of sparks and smoke leapt from the computer workstations. The entire business took less than 30 seconds. In the small kitchen, Natalia Semyonovna spilled her coffee and looked up, horror in her eyes. Back in the main control room, Xenia bent down and removed a second firing key hanging on a silver chain from around the dead duty officer's neck, and went over to the long console at which Urumov had already taken his place, throwing switches and watching the long screen light up high above the instruments. With great precision, Urumov slid the GoldenEye disc into a slot, not unlike a CD player. He placed the day's code card in front of him and inserted the key into a lock to the right of the point where the golden disc had slid into place. Xenia had already inserted the key taken from the duty officer. On my count, he rapped. 3, 2, 1, 0. They turned their keys in unison, and the rest of the console lit up. Needles flicked, and the screen above them showed a segment of the Earth with one of the satellites in orbit. Set target acquisition for Petya. Severnaya. The general ordered. High above the Earth's surface, a piece of what appeared to be space junk, possibly the burned-out stage of a rocket, seemed to be tumbling around in orbit. But as the command from Severnaya leaped silently through space to wake it up, so the satellite-coded Petya emitted blasts from hidden propulsion units and began to change course. Inside the control room, both Urumov and Xenia looked at the screen above them and saw what Natalia had been watching less than half an hour before. The red symbol that was the Petya began to move rapidly, shifting from its position over the Middle East and heading at an unthinkable speed towards northern Russia. On a lower display screen, information started to ribbon out. Petya location, 80.31.160.17. Target, 78.08.107.58. Then, time to target, 15.43.21. Urumov, consulting the card containing the codes, began to punch in a series of numbers. The display now flashed a further message. Weapon armed. At that very moment, panic-stricken at what she could hear, Natalia knocked over her cup. In the sterile silence, the noise was like a hand grenade exploding. Both Urumov and Xenia jerked back. Check it, the general said in a low voice, and as Xenia walked away, so the second in command, sprawled in his own blood on the floor, moved. Close to death, it was almost a reflex action. His hand shot up and punched one of the many alarm buttons in the room. Xenia whirled around, giving him a quick and final burst from the Uzi. But it came a fraction too late, and their ears were assaulted by a sudden shrieking of warning sirens and alarms. Xenia, pausing, looked anxiously at the general, who said, "Get on with it. Their best response time is 17 minutes. This place will be hit in less than 15 now. Go!" In the kitchen, Natalia pulled a chair to a point directly under the maintenance grill in the room's ceiling and started to work on loosening the metal. She had pulled it halfway down when she heard the rapid footsteps of Xenia coming hell for leather down the passageway. Miles away, at the Anadyr Air Base in Siberia, 3 MiG-23 MDLs, Flogger Ks, hurtled off the main runway. The pilots had only just come on duty when the alarm sounded, and they received the target information literally as they were taxiing from their bunkers. In seconds, they would be on their way to Severnaya Station. Xenia kicked the kitchen door open, saw the broken cup and the spillage of coffee, then looked at the chair and the metal grill above it, now dangling, ripped from its setting. She smiled grimly and lifted the Uzi, spraying the entire ceiling, changing magazines and blasting away again. Nobody hiding up there could possibly live. Back at the console, she told Urumov that she had dealt with the matter. He nodded with a tiny smile on his lips, then gestured towards the timers ticking down at what appeared to be a very fast pace. "Time flies, Colonel. They have a saying in the West." She grinned at him. "Time flies, particularly when you're having fun." He nodded again, slipped the GoldenEye disc from the console and placed it in his briefcase, which he closed with the finality of a coffin lid. "I think we should get out of here." Using the voice print security system again, they left, once more marching in step, up the concrete stairs and out into the cold. In less than 4 minutes, the Tigre helicopter was starting to lift off in a cloud of snow, from which it emerged, black and sinister. Below the earth, in the small kitchen, one of the cupboard doors squeaked and opened as Natalia crawled out. In London, James Bond was just entering the operations room below the Secret Intelligence Service's headquarters.